Hi, I'm Shannon, one of the librarians here at Naperville Public Library, and today we're going to talk about when wallpaper could kill, our toxic household history. Ah, the good old days. Remember when paints could be laced with heavy metals, your Fiesta ware might be radioactive, Coca-Cola contained cocaine, cosmetics could be poisonous, and yes, your wallpaper might kill you. This program will take a look at the last 2 centuries of toxic household history, from decor and fashion to medicines and foodstuffs. So let's start out with deadly decor. And starting right away with that killer wallpaper that I just mentioned. Vividly colored wallpaper was all the rage in the Victorian era, and no color was more trendy than Scheele's green, first created by Carl Scheele, a Swedish chemist who used copper arsenite to create a brilliant green color in 1775. However, the arsenite contains arsenic, and particularly in damp or hot environments, it would release arsenic gas, making people ill. Author Charlotte Perkins Gilman even wrote a story, The Yellow Wallpaper, about a woman's descent into madness when confined in a room papered in the sickly color. Napoleon Bonaparte died of stomach cancer in a room papered in the fashionable Scheele's green, but it may have been exacerbated by the carcinogenic gas released by the wallpaper, since he liked to take lots of baths. In the 20th century, his hair was tested and found to have high levels of arsenic. William Morris, who designed some of the most famous wallpaper of the 19th century and whose father's company was the largest producer of arsenic in the U.S., claimed to not believe that arsenic was poisonous. After all, he had this arsenic-laced wallpaper in his own home, so it couldn't be that. Eventually, he and other designers bowed to public pressure and consumer tastes and were pushed to stop using arsenic in their products. Various elements have been used as the basis of paints and dyes for centuries, but their dangers have led them to fall out of favor. We've mentioned arsenic in Scheele's green. It was used as a paint pigment as well as in fabric dye and wallpaper. Lead white was favored for its brilliance, but its toxicity has led it to be banned in most countries. Cadmium red was discovered in 1817 and favored for its brilliant jewel tone, but it is now banned in Europe because artists washing out their brushes were contaminating drinking water. In the 1930s, Dr. Frank Sear embarked on a project to make school buses uniform and visible and came up with the color known as National School Bus Chrome, but it contained high levels of lead and chromium that were very dangerous, especially when inhaled. Today's formula for school bus yellow does not contain the toxins. And now a look at radioactive dishes. If a friend collects vintage dishware and invites you over to dinner, be careful which color plate you eat off of. The orange-red color of Fiesta ware, which began production in 1936, was originally made with natural uranium, and the color is even referred to by collectors as radioactive red. In 1943, uranium was needed for the war effort, so production of this color ceased. When it resumed in 1959, depleted uranium was used until production of this color stopped in 1972 or 73. So is it actually radioactive? Geiger counter tests have been done on vintage dishes glazed with uranium, including Fiesta ware and Vistosa, as well as uranium glass, which fluoresces green under ultraviolet light, and they do show varying degrees of radioactivity. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency recommends not to eat off vintage dishware glazed with uranium glazes. Modern red Fiesta ware is not glazed with uranium and is not radioactive. Now let's look around the house. So we've already talked about killer wallpaper, poisonous paints, and deadly dishware, but here are some other ways your home might have tried to kill you in the last few centuries. Lead plumbing carried water for decades, carrying toxins along with the water, and unfortunately legacies of this have survived, as we saw in Flint, Michigan. Early home refrigerators up until the 1920s involved using toxic gases such as ammonia, methyl chloride, and sulfur dioxide as refrigerants, which could leak and cause fatal accidents. And because of this, General Motors, Frigidaire, and DuPont worked together to discover a non-toxic refrigerant solution, and that ended up being Freon. A cheap, clean, and non-flammable magic material, according to Life magazine in the 1940s, began being heavily used in the Industrial Revolution in everything from roofing to cement to tiles to insulation to children's toys. It was asbestos. However, asbestos fibers are deadly when they get into the lungs, causing inflammation and scarring. 67 countries and territories have now banned its use. And now more arsenic in your house, yay. It seems like arsenic was everywhere in the 1800s, on the walls, in the paint, even on your face and body, and more on that in a minute. Arsenic was tasteless and odorless, and its effects could be passed off as food poisoning, so its popular use in everything from dye to flypaper led to the Arsenic Act of 1851 in the UK, putting tighter rules on its sales and requiring it to be colored indigo so it couldn't easily be obscured. But it was quite literally used as a poison as well. The product called Paris Green was used as a rat poison and insecticide spray, and it was sprayed from airplanes to control malaria in Italy, Sardinia, and Corsica during 1944 and 1945. And when trying to make cheap candles in the 1830s, chemist Michel Charveau separated tallow and added a, quote, secret ingredient, arsenic, which could be detected by its garlic-like scent, and the toxic tapers were referred to as corpse candles. And now a look at killer fashion. So a few decades ago, it would have been a compliment to have been told that your style was killer, but in the 1800s, it might literally have been true. Aniline dyes gave garment workers sores and bladder cancer and also inflamed the feet of the men who wore them. Dresses were dyed with the same arsenic-laced colorants that were used in the toxic wallpaper. It was the first color-fast green dye when it was invented in the late 1700s, and the fashion world went wild for it. Unfortunately, it was a deadly affair. It was determined by analytical chemist Dr. A.W. Hoffman that a stylish ball gown could contain up to half its weight in arsenic, so imagine being in a ballroom full of them. Artificial flowers were also dusted with green arsenic powder to look more natural. However, this had devastating effects on the health of the factory workers who created them. 19-year-old Matilda Schurr died of arsenic poisoning from the exposure while doing this job. Her internal organs were affected as well as her nails and eyes. A floral headdress dusted with arsenic powder was estimated to contain enough poison to kill 20 people. And now a look at hats. If you're familiar with the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, he does have historical roots. Mercury was used by hat makers to mat the hair of rabbits or hares into felt, and this was used to make men's top hats in the 1800s. But it made for a debilitating and ultimately fatal career for the hatters who worked with it. Inhaling the mercury made it go straight to the brain, hence the saying, mad as a hatter, and other symptoms including trembling, known as the Danbury Shakes for the hat-making town of Danbury, Connecticut, paranoia, cardiorespiratory issues, and early death. The men who wore the hats were generally protected by the hat's lining, so this only affected the makers, not the wearers. And now a look at celluloid. Inventor Alexander Parkes developed the first man-made plastic in 1856. It was moldable and cheap and was called Parksine in his home country of England, but we know it as celluloid in the US. Celluloid was a cheap way to create things that had once been fashioned out of more costly materials like ivory or tortoiseshell, such as combs or jewelry. Even cuffs and collars could be made out of it. However, celluloid could explode if heated. Stories of women's combs exploding in their hair became news. In November 1909, a comb factory in Brooklyn exploded, killing 9 people. And on to deadly cosmetics. Up until the early 20th century, the United States and most other countries had no regulation on the ingredients in beauty products or pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics weren't tested for their poisonous effects. Thus, many toxic products were historically used in cosmetics. Arsenic could be applied to the face as a tonic splash to maintain a fashionably pale complexion, and women would eat arsenic complexion wafers advertised as perfectly harmless to clear their skin. Lead and mercury could be found in cosmetics as well. In 1869, several cases of lead palsy with symptoms including weight loss, atrophy, and paralysis were linked to the skin whitening cream Laird's Bloom of Youth. Harper's Bazaar magazine advised young women in their questionably named beauty column, The Ugly Girl Papers, to cover the face with opium at night and wash it off with ammonia the next day. Opium is addictive with a host of side effects, and ammonia can burn skin, so this was all around poor advice. Thallium acetate was used as a hair removal method, but thallium is very toxic and causes poisoning when absorbed through the skin. Belladonna, meaning beautiful lady in Italian, is a poisonous plant that was used to make eye-dilating eye drops. This achieved a dewy-eyed look with dilated pupils, but excessive use could cause blindness. Women would also achieve this look by squeezing perfume or citrus juice into their eyes, but the effect was shorter-lived. And now a look at radium. Radium is a highly radioactive chemical element discovered by chemists Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898. The former died of aplastic anemia believed to have been contracted due to her long-term exposure to radiation. Despite this, it was a long time before the toxic nature was understood, and until then, radium was used in an array of products including cosmetics, cigarettes, and toothpaste. This German ad here on the right says, Doramad radioactive toothpaste creates natural freshness in the mouth. Radium-based cosmetics such as the Radiol brand included lipstick, blush, and powder starting in around 1917. When ingested, radium can lead to anemia, bone fractures, necrosis, and leukemia. Now let's take a look inside the medicine chest. Imagine an era when babies were soothed with morphine, cough drops contained cocaine, and traveling medicine shows roamed the landscape. It wasn't all that long ago. In the 19th century, opium, laudanum, an opium derivative mixed with water or wine, arsenic, and cocaine might all appear in medications that were freely sold by pharmacists and in town markets. Romantic-era writers of the Regency were known as opium eaters for their habits. Samuel Taylor Coleridge used it to deal with his neuralgia and rheumatic pains, and Thomas de Quincey wrote Confessions of an English Opium Eater. But Lord Byron, John Keats, and Percy Shelley used laudanum for recreational purposes. Byron's daughter, Ada Lovelace, a mathematical genius and the first computer programmer, became addicted to laudanum after it was prescribed for her asthma. Opium was used in infant quieting syrups made of water, treacle, and opium to calm fussy babies, but they could have severe health effects. These drugs could be obtained shockingly cheaply, 25 drops of laudanum for a penny. A patent medicine was a medication whose ingredients had been granted protection by the government for exclusivity. In reality, many were not patented, and they were often based on opium derivatives. Some attempted to claim to treat every ailment. For example, Mixer's cancer and scrofula syrup claimed to treat cancer, tumors, erysipelas, abscesses, ulcers, fever sores, goiter, catarrh, which is the old word for congestion, salt rheum, scald head, piles, rheumatism, and all blood diseases. The most successful patent medicine manufacturer of his era was James Cook Ayer, maker of Ayer's cherry pectoral and other patent medicines. His fortune was an estimated $20 million, and this medication contained alcohol and 3 grams of morphine per bottle. Traveling hawkers often sold these cure-alls at medicine shows around the country. Cocaine was first extracted from coca leaves by German chemist Albert Niemann in 1860, and it began to turn up in cough drops and toothache remedies. In 1863, Vin Mariani, a coca wine, was praised by the likes of Queen Victoria and Rudyard Kipling. It could contain up to 7.2 milligrams per ounce of cocaine. Coca-Cola once also contained cocaine. It was created by Confederate Colonel John Pemberton, who was addicted to morphine after being wounded in the Civil War. He attempted to create a different treatment and came up with Pemberton's French wine coca nerve tonic. In 1886, when prohibition laws were passed in parts of Georgia, he created a non-alcoholic but still cocaine-laced version, which was sold as a patent medicine. Pemberton's recipe called for 5 ounces of coca leaf per gallon of syrup. After 1904, Coca-Cola did not contain cocaine as the processing changed. In 1868, the Pharmacy Act in England recognized dangerous drugs and limited their sales to registered chemists and pharmacists. Criticism came from the temperance movement in the late 19th century, as many patent medicines used alcohol. By this time, many Americans were in favor of laws disclosing the ingredients in patent medicines. Theodore Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. And let's take a peek inside the pantry now. Prior to the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, adulterants that even at the time were known to be unsafe or even deadly could be added to foods. Lead chromates were used in mustard, mercury and arsenic compounds were used as colorants in candies, and boracic acid was used to purify milk by removing the sour taste and smell, but it made people ill and often contained bovine tuberculosis. Bread makers would add weight and heft with cheaper ingredients such as plaster of Paris, chalk, or alum, an aluminum-based compound, which caused digestive problems. Daft, a mixture of plaster of Paris and limestone, was added to cheap candies to stretch sugar, which was costly. Broxy was a Victorian umbrella term for any meat from the butcher that had dropped dead from disease, so it could likely be purchased cheaper. The conditions in the meatpacking industry in the United States came to light in the early 20th century, particularly when Upton Sinclair published the novel The Jungle in 1906. It was meant to show the harsh conditions of working in the industry, but readers were alarmed by the descriptions of health violations and unhygienic practices. Sinclair said, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach." Reforms such as the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906 followed the public reaction. Harvey Washington Wiley was a notable chemist involved with the passing of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. His Poison Squad brought to light the need for this sort of federal-level safety regulation in regard to food and medicine. In 1912, he began to work for Good Housekeeping magazine and developed the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, his concern still for the customer. To learn more about Wiley and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, read The Poison Squad by Deborah Blum. It's worth mentioning that though many of these dangerous products have been purged from our lives, some may remain. For example, old houses may still contain lead paint, uranium glass may still turn up in antique stores, and so on. Also, there are still plenty of chemicals in use in our modern world, so let's see if my successor in 100 years does a sequel program, astonished at all the things that we ate and drank and cleaned with in the 2020s. And thank you for watching. Hope you've learned a little something today. I hope we'll see you again soon at the library, and bye-bye for now.